Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining this edition of Wiz's CISO webinar series. I'll be moderating today's panel. My name is Ryan Kazantian, Chief Information Security Officer at Wiz, where I lead our security engineering, operations, and governance risk and compliance programs. Today we're going to have a 25-minute panel discussion and then 5 minutes towards the end for live Q&A. So if you have questions that come to mind as we're discussing, please put them in chat. We'll be monitoring them and then pick as many as we can to cover at the end of the session. And again, please engage and enjoy the discussion. With that, I'm excited to be joined by a fantastic panel of experts who are going to be sharing their experience and perspectives. So just to get started, I'll have each of our panelists give a brief introduction to their role and background and a brief bit about their current cloud posture and the trajectory that got them there. Let's begin with Adam Fletcher at Blackstone.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Always exciting to do, a Wiz event. So my name is Adam Fletcher. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Blackstone. So I run cyber and physical security for Blackstone, which is, one of the world's largest alternative asset managers with over $1 trillion in assets under management. We are currently all cloud. We are predominantly AWS, a little bit of Azure, mix of SaaS, Office 365, kind of those types of things. And our journey is relatively new, probably about 5 years now, since we started moving out of our data centers and into the cloud. And our journey really started with, a slow transition to, how do we take, all of the success that we've had securing our enterprise, across data center infrastructure, and apply those same paradigms, confidentiality, integrity, availability, but with the new technologies, new capabilities, the elasticity and the speed of the cloud. So it's been a long transition, but I think, we're there. Wiz has been a huge part of it, and, love the team, love the product.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. Carla.
Hi, I'm Carla Sweeney. I lead the security team at Red Ventures. We are a collection of digital brands, including some that you may have heard of. Bankrate.com, The Points Guy, CNET are a couple. I've spent my whole career in various technology, risk, and operations roles leading up to this point. We at Red Ventures are at this point fully in the cloud after a series of data center migrations a couple of years ago, similar to Adam.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, Carla. Last but not least, Jeff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Renich. I'm the SVP of IT and the CISO at New American Funding. It's a national mortgage company. I've been here just over 4 years. I inherited some cloud when I started, but the company's been very active to go full cloud the past few years. In the very beginning, of course, posture was not managed properly. A lot of controls were missing, and it really helps getting the right tool in place to kind of strengthen posture over time. But the goal really is to maintain a strong posture, work closely with the developers who are very active in cloud, just make sure that it's a partnership along the way to enable the business.
Great. Welcome, Jeff. And thank you all for sharing that context. I think the diversity of experiences here is super interesting as we talk about your roles and your work to secure your cloud. Maybe to begin with Adam, I'd love to hear a bit about how you think about conveying risk and demonstrating progress on your strategic security initiatives when you're working with your fellow executives or the board, and especially just hearing a bit about how they look at cloud security as part of your broader security risk posture.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit relative, considering that we are now all cloud, right? So cloud security is really just security. Everything is, how are we going to do all of the things that you would expect to see in a security program, whether that's threat and vulnerability management, firewalls, basically all of those components, are just now, how do we do that in the cloud? And I think that, when I talk to my peers who run different areas of IT, whether it's software development or, enterprise infrastructure or, kind of the platform, the server and application engineering team or the database team, things like that. It's really just been, can we take what we knew from the data center world And can we adapt that to the technologies or the services that are available to us in this modern cloud world? And, sometimes it's lift and shift, and sometimes it's, the modern function. But at the end of the day, the goal that you're trying to achieve and the outcome that you're trying to achieve is the same. So, I think for us, it's about it's the same question. How do we reduce risk, in the most efficient way using the technologies that we have? The one thing that's changed, I think, is that in the cloud, the way that we've created, a more federated infrastructure, where DevOps teams are more responsible for their own accounts. There is more reliance on them to do work than there was before, when there was a data center perimeter. I knew exactly what the attack surface was, and security could kind of do things without asking other people for help.
Yeah, I think seeing that evolution and how empowered DevOps or SRE teams are as owners of and operators of the infrastructure, and to help secure it is crucial. And Carla, I know when we were preparing, we chatted a bit about this. I'd love to hear your take on how you think about the role of DevOps in security and organizing security efforts among those stakeholders.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Our DevOps teams are decentralized by business segment, and our security team is just one team. And so our model is very much reliant on heavy governance and less on direct control. As Adam was saying, the security team can't do everything by themselves, and we have fewer gates to block things in this model. And so our DevOps teams are very autonomous. We have to have a lot of visibility into our cloud environments to understand where the risks are and where the gaps are, and have the right relationships in place, and the right level of influence to make sure that the security practices we want to be happening there are.
Jeff, do you have a similar operating model as what Carla was describing for your DevOps and security orgs?
Yes, it's very similar. Of course, security team works closely with developers, but they have a lot of free reign to enable their product development, release products. So it's really a lot of coordination between giving the flexibility for enablement, but also governance.
Yeah, absolutely. So Adam, as you're looking at other either team members in your org or peers that have similar roles to yourself, I think one of the things that CISOs always like to discuss is how they're aligning priorities with the board, and meeting between what the security team has decided are the biggest priorities or risks versus the concerns or perception of the executive team or the board, which sometimes may diverge. What advice do you have for security leaders that are trying to figure out the right way to get that ideal alignment and influence across the organization?
I think this is pretty basic advice. I don't think that it'll come as a surprise to anybody, but assuming you have, that regular dialogue with your executive team, assuming you have, the access to the board, I think, aligning on, the executive team and the board's risk tolerance, and like what is most important to them, what do they think is a bad day for the organization? It might not necessarily be what you as a security practitioner think is a bad day for the organization, right? I think security people often think that, if we use a house analogy, all the doors and windows need to be locked because, God forbid, someone comes in. But, the owner of the house might say, well, there's nothing valuable in the house, and I don't feel great about someone coming into my house, but if there's nothing for them to steal or break, then who really cares? So, I think as a modern security leader, you really have to have that dialogue, and use your best judgment to start out and say, hey, here's what I think drives our business. Here's what I think, a significant loss, or I guess I'll use the SEC's word, a material, loss for our business looks like. Do you guys agree with this? Because this is how I'm going to drive, a strategy to protect our infrastructure, our assets, our intellectual property, right? And if we're not in alignment, then I'm going to be doing the wrong things. But if we are, then, here's what I need to do that.
Jeff, as you're thinking about or coaching your own leaders in your security teams about influencing and working cross-functionally effectively, what are some of the things you're guiding or advising them to do?
Well, a part of the education process is making them understand that cloud's not more secure. There's so many parameters to configure in cloud, unlike on-premise. With the education process it takes a lot of work, governance, and coordination to make that happen. But with that, cloud is a lot more enablement capable, right? Because the platform as a service, the elasticity, the multi-cloud. But once again, I always like to talk about the weakest link, and sometimes a privileged user could do a lot of damage. We look at breaches from Okta and the SaaS token, Microsoft, the AI breach. So it's really important to know that we have to limit access and get more to a just-in-time access concept.
Yeah, and Carla, what about for you as you work with engineering and ops teams? How have you found security to be most successful in influencing and collaborating with them?
I think similar to what the others were saying in my points earlier, I think building relationships has been really important, both in the business and with tech leaders, to make sure that on the security team, we fully understand and we're listening to understand the goals of those groups and the challenges. And then I think it's really important for the security team to be able to help prioritize what teams should be focused on first, second, and third. I mean, from a security perspective, we see the sky is falling. Like, we see all of the risks, and it's our job to do that. And it would be easy to throw the whole kitchen sink of problems at the tech leaders and say, hey, we need to fix this all right now. In the real world, they have lots of priorities. So to be able to help influence, okay, here's what we need you to work on first, second, third, and oh, by the way, you could get ahead of these and spend less time remediating if you were to put some of this into your build pipeline. So I think it's being able to understand what the business really needs.
Is the effective recency bias a challenge, where someone outside security sees a headline and is worried this is suddenly the most important thing for your org to jump on?
I like that, because I think if it means they care and they're wondering, could this happen here? And I don't want this to happen here. So it's like another person on the team to champion efforts. We do have to educate sometimes what is most important compared to what we've already had on the plate. But I love when people come and say, hey, do we need to do something about this, instead of us having to force that every time.
Yeah, it's always better when there's that interest and enthusiasm and when they're engaging with security rather than not. Well, thanks, Jeff. Let's switch to another topic. There's been a lot of media attention in the last year around legal liability that is increasingly be assumed by CISOs, especially with the recent action around the Wells notice for SolarWinds, and then, of course, prior to that, the Uber Joe Sullivan case. How have you seen this impact the CISO role and how leaders are adjusting their approach?
Well, I think the CISOs are getting quite nervous these days. I mean, look at Joe Sullivan, look at Tim Brown, and just, past breaches of the Yahoo. And besides SEC, another big reg to really follow is NYDFS, right? That's had a lot of teeth the last few years. And I think 2024 will be the year where you're going to see more liability in CISOs, and you potentially come a little more downstream, is what others are predicting. So it's really about how do we protect ourselves, D&O, E&O, look at identification, potentially our own legal retainers, so all these things. But also, it's very important that we're closely with the board, the leadership, to understand we're not the only ones who are at risk. It's also them. It is a partnership. And as right now, the CISOs are kind of the fall guys, so we got to change that.
Adam, are you seeing the same thing and having the same sorts of conversations with your fellow leaders?
I think, well, sure. I mean, I think every CISO in basically every community I'm a member of, is talking about this. There are lots of lawyers, lots of recruiters, lots of experts, and even at an event earlier this week, there was a former expert witness for, one of the aforementioned trials, talking about, how to protect yourself. Like, this is a constant conversation right now. I think, I'm on the more practical side of this, of what can we actually be doing in our internal program, so that like this doesn't even, really present such a big risk for us. I think in addition to all of that kind of after the bad thing happens protection, like DNO and indemnification, et cetera, like I'm looking at it as another risk to manage, right? So for example, are we doing a good enough job tracking incidents today so that if we were under a regulatory review and the SEC came in and said, show me a list of all of the incidents that you've had and why you didn't think that they were material and why you didn't want to report them, like we have a verifiable policy, a verifiable process, right? And we can basically show them everything so that, someone else's, complaint might be a non-issue. Like I'm trying to reduce risk on the front end, not on the back end.
Yeah, super interesting. Carla, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What have the conversations with you and your leadership team around the role of security and assuming the extent to which you're assuming risk and liability?
I mean, I think it's not a new concept for the security officer to be the scapegoat in the event of a security incident, but the personal liability aspect is different now with some of the SEC rules. And so, I think accountability has always been applied a little bit differently at companies, but it feels different now. Given this like higher level of scrutiny on the CISO role, I think it's going to be interesting to see, and I hope it doesn't, but it will be interesting to see if it deters some of the rising leaders' career aspirations from, hey, I want to be a CISO one day, to, you know what, I think I'd rather be an architect, or I would rather take an operational role or something totally different because they want to avoid that for themselves in the future. There's other career options that can seem safer. And so this is an industry with a severe shortage of talent, and I would hate for it to drive more people out.
Do you all find that it's forcing more explicit conversations around the distinction between security owning risks versus identifying and surfacing or helping prioritize risks?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so as well. I think, having a robust, kind of risk management or risk assessment and risk management, policy and procedure, and then understanding, who accepts the risk, who signs off on the risk, how that is being discussed, up to whatever level is appropriate for accepting that risk, which might be, CEO or board, right? That like having that and having that documented in a defensible way, I think is something that everybody needs to have, starting in 2 days.
Maybe to wrap with one last topic before we switch to our audience Q&A. Over the last, I'd really say 5 years, there's been just a growing number of legal and regulatory drivers to force organizations to disclose incidents quickly, be it GDPR and privacy impacting incidents, or SEC guidelines for material disclosure of material incidents. Most organizations now are committed to doing disclosure for material incidents within 72 or 48 hours, depending on what framework you're looking at. That's challenging if you've ever dealt with a breach situation. And I'd love to hear how you all think about managing reputation and balancing transparency and clear communications when you don't necessarily have all the information. Jeff, maybe to start out, would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think if you look at the recent 10Ks by a few of the breaches, they were very brief, and sometimes they were probably more positive than they were, saying there has not been a breach, when a week or two later comes out, yes, there was a breach. So I think it's definitely very important to err on the cautious side on that little statement, because you're giving customers a false sense of security. Good example is the largest IDP vendor in the world said, oh, only 130 of our customers. A week or two later, all customers. So, and if we would have known all customers sooner, we could take proactive measures.
But with the sort of competing forces of early disclosure versus the realities of how long it may take to scope an incident, though, like how do you advise your own teams on managing that?
I think it's definitely a challenge. One of the problems is really, do you have the right signals for the early detection? The dwell time on a lot of breaches can be quite long before detection. So it's trying to improve our visibility to all our signals to have a more accurate response.
I think too, like weighing with privacy, with legal, what is the potential harm of not notifying yet while we get our arms around the full scope of the incident? Because I think, like, of course, we want perfect information so that when we explain it, we have a good story to tell. But what is the degree of harm if we don't?
So I'll pick up on something that Carla just said, which is, she said, with the help of privacy and legal. I think, it's important for, anybody who's leading security on this call to understand, like, you have to make it clear that as the head of security, the CISO, whatever, like, you are not going to make a decision about whether to notify, whether to, say something publicly, whether something is material by yourself, right? You should have an incident response team made up of partners in legal and compliance and privacy and public affairs and technology and HR, that when you think that there is a thing that might become a big thing, like, you get that group together, and then together you decide, should we bring in outside forensics teams? Should we bring in outside counsel? And that group then decides, do we need to loop in the CEO and the board? And then that group decides, do we have a notification obligation to a regulator, to our clients, to our employees, whoever? Like, the CISO should never be in a position where somebody says, you decided that this wasn't material, and like, that decision's on you, and therefore you're going to jail.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, engaging legal and your communications team early and having them involved throughout is crucial. It can't be something decided in an autonomous vacuum. On a technical level, as you continue in your cloud journeys, how is the process of planning and preparing for incident response in cloud environments changing your approaches, if at all? Like, we talked earlier about the expanded role of DevOps teams. So as you think about preparing for an incident in the cloud and these drivers to scope and assess quickly, what are some of the things you're all prioritizing?
I can start there. I mean, I think that was a huge priority for us. And being mostly AWS, there was a huge opportunity for us to partner closely with AWS's teams, most of which is kind of a free service that you can get access to if you ask for it, to do either tabletop or, an hour's worth of investigation help, because, with all of the structure and all of the layers of structure, between, let's say, an attacker and a resource that contains sensitive data in AWS, it's not really as simple as looking at your logs and correlating source and destination across everything that's in one place. And so we partnered very closely with, AWS security experts for our SOC, and our blue team to actually learn, like, how to correlate all of that information, so that if they saw something suspicious at the lowest level, they could work their way backwards all the way to where the potential attack was coming from, and kind of gather all of that information in AWS. Like, it is, although the goal is the same, the outcome is the same, how you actually do it and the technologies and the tools that you're using are different. So you have to relearn those. The skills that you had in the data center don't necessarily translate.
Jeff, Carla, are you likewise weaving in cloud specific scenarios into your tabletop and prep processes now?
Yeah, I mean, given that we're fully cloud-based now, that we have to. I think too, just so similar to the conversation we had earlier with security being a central team and the DevOps teams being decentralized, like, having as much visibility as we possibly can is incredibly important. There's things being spun up, spun down all the time. And so we need to just make sure that we are aware of what is happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, also add, I think it's critical to really look at your cloud detection response capabilities, ideally map to MITRE, see where gaps are at, and try to close those gaps.
Yeah, I've likewise found that's helpful, because also for partner teams, it shows you're aligning on some agreed upon set of criteria and standard, and that helps them understand what good looks like. What does good coverage look like? Well, cool. we are going to switch over to audience Q&A. We've got a bunch of questions going in. This first one was directed for Adam. It was a question around translating and conveying risks to the board. So the question is, how do you convert technical risks in the cloud to risks on assets and conveying impact on either your cyber insurance, risk posture, or CF to the SEC and board?
So I think, you know, the technical risks really, I think you still roll up to the same categories, you know, as before, right? Can I do patch management? You know, are the number of vulnerabilities or the types of vulnerabilities the same? You know, and do I have the processes and the tools to manage those, you know, in the cloud, right? And I think when you try and align that to your risk management program, you know, to your budgets, you know, and your reporting up to executive teams and boards, what you're basically saying is, here's my policy, right? We need to address critical vulnerabilities quickly. We need to patch, you know, periodically. We need to do all of these things. If we have the tools to be able to do that, are we meeting the standards, you know, and the baseline expectation that we've set out to meet, or are we not? You know, and if we're not, is it because we don't have technology and we need to make additional investment? Or is it because, you know, other people who are also responsible for security are not holding up their end of the job? And hopefully that particular conversation never gets to the board. Like, that should be handled in the executive team or the technology team level, you know, but like, you have to measure it first, then you have to measure what you're managing. And then you have to report that so people know that you're doing it, and they either feel, you know, compelled through competition, you know, or, you know, by their management to participate in the process.
Interesting. I'm also curious to get your take specifically, since the question mentioned cyber insurance. I found today most carriers tend to focus more on corporate security controls and anything tied to ransomware, which makes sense given where the preponderance of claims are coming from. Are you seeing a shift yet to focus on controls that are more specific to your cloud environment and risk? Maybe to start, Jeff.
I have not. I think the whole process for cyber insurance qualification is broken. They're not looking at the latest threats, the latest focus areas like machine identities. They're not going deep enough on MFA, looking at the challenge factors. Is it phish resistance? So over time, I'll catch up. But more importantly, I think the industry's got to move more towards continuous control monitoring, because how you answer a questionnaire once a year does not reflect your posture and risk throughout the year.
Very, very true. Carla, have you seen the same with cyber insurance from your vantage point?
Yeah, and Jeff, you said continuous control monitoring, and I kind of jumped a little bit because I love that idea in theory. And in practice, if it looks like, hey, here's a report from Security Scorecard, like that also doesn't necessarily tell the full story, and can paint a rosy picture that doesn't necessarily exist. So I totally agree with you that that underwriting process is broken and not ideal from a practitioner standpoint. Going through it is very painful, but it also feels like it's not yielding an accurate result if I were on the underwriting side.
Let's do one more quick question before we wrap up. Carla, we had a question around what benchmarks you use to frame how you budget for request budget for security headcount and resources.
I think it's less like a metric or a percentage of tech spend or headcount or anything like that, and more, are we, exactly what Adam was saying earlier, are we meeting our objectives? And if not, is it because of a lack of investment? Why? So like, what do I need to be successful in our objectives as a security team? Sometimes it's more budget, sometimes it's for other people to help out in the organization. So I don't think that as a function of spend would necessarily fly in our organization, but certainly risk management does. So that's what I use.
Yeah, a quick plug for, you know, Phil Venable's blog. You know, he just wrote a great article on this about the dangers of benchmarking, you know, and like, run your own security program, set your goals, set your objectives, measure to those, you know, because like comparing yourself all around, you know, is a hard act to follow.
That is a great call out, as many of us are working on end of year exercises for budget and planning for the coming year. So, well, great. With that, we'll wrap things up since we're on time. Carla, Jeff, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our audience for jumping in with questions, and hope everyone has a great rest of their week and year.
Thank you for having me.